Before New York's Mafia had rules, structure, order, one man stepped forward to shape it all. He dreamed of an empire, but his rise created a war that shook every street in New York. This is the story of Salvatore Maranzano, the architect, the strategist, and the man who changed the Mafia forever. Salvatore Maranzano's story begins in the rugged hills of Castellamare del Golfo, a Sicilian town built on old traditions, family honor, and silent power. Growing up in this environment shaped the foundations of the man he would become. Unlike many who joined the Mafia simply for survival, Maranzano carried ambition and intellect. He devoted hours to studying Roman history, especially the rise of Julius Caesar. The discipline, hierarchy, and strategy of ancient empires fascinated him more than anything else. Instead of admiring outlaws or bandits like others in his village, he admired generals. He admired order. He admired the idea of a structured system where every man knew his rank and every decision flowed from the top with absolute authority. These ideas were rare in the early Mafia, which was still chaotic, organized, and divided by endless rivalries. But for Maranzano, the Mafia was not just crime, it was battlefield of strategy. He learned early that true power didn't come from violence alone. It came from discipline, from structure, from loyalty like an army. By the time he became involved in Sicilian Mafia affairs, he already carried a mindset far different from the men around him. His dream wasn't just to survive the Mafia life. His dream was to organize it, control it, and shape it the way ancient rulers shaped kingdoms. This unique mindset, part scholar, part strategist, part traditional Sicilian, would follow him across the ocean, guiding every decision he made when he finally set foot in America. When Salvatore Maranzano arrived in America, he stepped to a world bursting with opportunity and chaos. New York in the early 1900s was a city growing faster than it could control, filled with immigrants searching for a future and criminals searching for power. For Maranzano, this wasn't just a new country. It was battlefield waiting for someone with vision. He entered a Mafia landscape still divided along old lines. Sicilian groups fought Neapolitan groups, Yumps, this mass clashed with old traditionalists, and everyone battled for a territory in bootlegging, gambling, and labor rackets. Most men came to America trying to escape the harshness of Sicily, but Maranzano came carrying Sicily with him, its discipline, its traditions, its silent rules of respect and punishment. Unlike many new arrivals who started from the bottom, Maranzano quickly had influence. He uses intelligence more than his gun. He understood people, how to read them, how to intimidate them, and how to win their loyalty. In an era when alcohol became illegal overnight, he saw opportunity. Bootlegging became his entry point into American power. He aligned with other Sicilian leaders from the Castellamare region, forming a tight network that trusted him deeply. But what set Maranzano apart was his ability to blend old-world Mafia culture with the new opportunities of New York. He didn't operate like a street-level gangster. He acted like a commander, setting up his operations with precision and order. Every man had a purpose. Every move had strategy behind it. America didn't change Maranzano. Instead, Maranzano changed the way many men in America looked at crime, loyalty, and leadership. And with each step forward, he moved closer to reshaping the entire Mafia structure in the United States. As Maranzano settled deeper into New York's underworld, he began building something far larger than a crew. He built a faction, a disciplined Sicilian force shaped by the values he carried from Castellamare. Most Mafia groups at the time operated loosely, small cliques shifting loyalties, and leaders who relied on fear more than structure. Maranzano saw weakness in that chaos, and he intended to replace it with order. He carefully surrounded himself with men who shared his heritage and values, especially those from Castellamare del Golfo, who already viewed him as natural leader. This region-based loyalty gave him a strong advantage. His men trusted him not just as a boss, but as a symbol of their shared identity. They followed him with the commitment of soldiers rather than street thugs. Maranzano's faction was different. He demanded discipline. Meetings were conducted with seriousness, plans were made with precision, and he pushed his men to think strategically rather than impulsively. He taught that control was more powerful than rage, and that loyalty mattered more than temporary profits. His guidance created a tight, focused organization at a time when most rival gangs were scattered and disorganized. As prohibition money flooded the streets, his faction grew stronger. His influence spread through bootlegging operations, real estate deals, and protection rackets. And while other bosses flaunted their wealth, Maranzano invested in control, expanding quietly, choosing alliances carefully, and preparing himself for something much bigger. This rising power didn't go unnoticed. Rival bosses saw Maranzano not just as another Sicilian gangster, but as a growing force, one with discipline, strategy, and ambition. As tensions rose across New York, it became clear that the city was heading toward a conflict, and Maranzano's faction was positioned at the center of it. The tension that had been quietly building in New York finally exploded into what would become one of the most violent Mafia conflicts in American history, the Castellamare War. It wasn't just a battle for territory or money, it was a war of identity, culture, and vision. On one side stood Joe, the boss, Masseria, the powerful leader of the older Americanized Mafia factions. On the other side rose Salvatore Maranzano, representing the disciplined Sicilian tradition and demanding the structure he believed the Mafia needed. The conflict didn't begin with a single event. It was a slow burn. Small disputes over bootlegging routes turned into confrontations. Battles for control of neighborhoods escalated. And beneath it all was a deeper resentment. Masseria ruled with brute force, while Maranzano represented a new kind of leadership that threatened the old ways. Their followers clashed on the streets, in restaurants, outside warehouses, anywhere influence could be gained or lost. The moment the first shots were fired, the lines were drawn. New York became divided between Masseria's mustache Pedits, who followed tradition but favored power without order, and Maranzano's disciplined Sicilians who believed the Mafia needed organization, unity, and rules. Hitmen roamed the city with targets constantly shifting. Alleys switched its sides. Fear became a daily routine in the underworld. Maranzano approached the conflict like a general rather than a gangster. He studied Masseria's movements, identified weaknesses, and deployed his soldiers carefully. While Masseria relied on intimidation, Maranzano relied on strategy. His faction moved quietly but effectively, using patience and precision to strike at the heart of Masseria's power. This war reshaped the Mafia landscape. It wasn't a quick conflict. It was a long, bloody struggle that pulled every major figure into its shadow. And as the violence intensified, one truth became clear: whichever leader survived this war would control the future of organized crime in New York. Maranzano understood that, and every step he took pushed him closer to the empire he envisioned. Maranzano's power did not come from loud threats or wild violence. It came from a rare combination of sharp intelligence and cold precision. He was the kind of leader who could sit quietly in a room, say only a few words, and still make every man feel his authority. What made him dangerous was not just his ability to give orders. It was the way he understood people, their fears, their ambitions, and their weaknesses. He modeled his leadership style after ancient empires. Just as Julius Caesar used both strategy and fear to command armies, Maranzano believed discipline was the soul of power. His men were expected to operate with silence, patience, and absolute obedience. No loud bragging, no reckless moves. Every action needed purpose. Every operation needed structure. But beneath that calm exterior was a ruthless core. Maranzano might have valued intelligence, but he never hesitated when violence was required. He believed that a leader must eliminate threats with the same precision a general uses to remove a weak link in his formation. If someone betrayed him, plotted against him, or even posed a potential threat, Maranzano acted swiftly. His decisions were unemotional, not personal, not impulsive, simply necessary. He used fear carefully, never excessively. He believed too much violence created chaos, but targeted violence created control. This is why many of his enemies feared him more than Masseria. Masseria was loud, unpredictable, and brutal. Maranzano, on the other hand, was calculated. You never knew when he was planning something. You never knew what he already knew. And that silence created a different kind of fear, the kind that made men think twice before crossing him. In meetings, he carried himself like a commander. He spoke about honor, discipline, and organization. And while many respected him for his vision, they also knew he carried a list of enemies in his mind, and he was always ready to act before someone acted against him. This balance, brains and brutality, strategy and steel, is what helped him survive the most dangerous moments of the war. It allowed him to rise above ordinary gangsters and position himself as a leader with a much larger purpose. His intelligence gave him influence. His ruthlessness ensured no one dared to challenge it. The turning point of the Castellamarese War came when the unthinkable happened. Joe, the boss, Masseria, one of the most feared and dominant mafia leaders in New York, was taken out, and the balance of power instantly shifted toward Salvatore Maranzano. This wasn't a random hit or a lucky break. It was the result of silent planning, strategic patience, and the ability to understand exactly when to strike. For months, the war had drained both sides. Blood on the streets, alliances collapsing, businesses disrupted. But Maranzano knew Masseria's strength didn't just come from his soldiers. It came from the fear he had built around himself. To win the war, that fear had to be shattered. And the only way to do that was to remove Masseria entirely. Maranzano didn't personally pull the trigger. He didn't need to. He understood something more important. Real power comes from influence, not presence. By working through intermediaries and tapping into the resentment growing inside Masseria's own circle, Maranzano created an opening. Men who once swore loyalty to Masseria began to question his leadership, and Maranzano was ready to capitalize on every doubt. When the moment finally arrived, it was quiet and clean. Masseria was lured to a Coney Island restaurant for what he believed was a business meeting. He sat at a table playing cards, never realizing he had walked directly into his last moment of power. The hit squad moved with precision, ending his reign in a matter of seconds. For the underworld, it was more than just a killing. It was the collapse of an empire. News of Masseria's death spread through New York faster than any bullet. For many, it signaled the end of chaos. For others, it marked the rise of a new order. Almost instantly, Maranzano emerged as the uncontested winner of the war. His discipline, strategy, and unshakable patience had paid off. He had defeated a man who once seemed untouchable. With Masseria gone, doors opened. Alliances shifted. Men who had feared taking sides suddenly flocked toward Maranzano, recognizing him as the new pillar of strength in the underworld. And as the dust settled, It became clear that this victory was not just the end of a conflict, it was the beginning of Maranzano's opportunity to reshape the Mafia exactly the way he had always envisioned. He had won the war. Now he was ready to build his empire. With Masseria gone and the war finally leaning in his favor, Maranzano stepped into a moment of history that few men ever reach, the chance to rebuild an entire criminal empire from the ground up. The Mafia in New York had been chaotic, divided, and constantly tearing itself apart. But Maranzano wasn't satisfied with simply winning the war. He wanted to reshape the entire structure so no war like this would ever erupt again. Drawing from his lifelong obsession with ancient Rome, Maranzano envisioned a system built on order, hierarchy, and balance. He believed the Mafia needed something it had never truly possessed: a clear chain of command. So he reorganized the entire underworld into 5 families, each with its own territory, leadership, and responsibilities. It was a blueprint meant to create stability while keeping every faction under his watchful eye. The families he shaped would become legendary: Bonanno family, Colombo family, Gambino family, Genovese family, Lucci's family. What made this moment historic wasn't just the names. It was the structure behind them. Each family had a boss, underboss, consigliere, caporegimes, and soldiers. Every member had a place. Every decision flowed through ranks. The chaos of the past was replaced with a military-style order built to last for generations. Maranzano didn't simply reorganize power, he introduced a culture. Rules about loyalty, betrayal, respect, punishment, and the handling of disputes became part of a more formal code. And while these rules would evolve over time, the foundation he laid became the backbone of organized crime in New York. His goal was simple but monumental: create a mafia that was efficient, disciplined, and unified, a system where numbers, structure, and loyalty mattered as much as money and muscle. By giving each faction its own territory, he eliminated the endless turf wars that had torn the old Mafia apart. And by positioning himself above them, he created a centralized power that mirrored the structure of an empire. This moment became one of the most defining transformations in American organized crime. Maranzano carved order out of chaos, giving shape to a world that had previously been controlled only by fear and rivalry. His vision turned scattered gangs into organized institutions that would dominate New York for decades. The 5 families weren't just a creation. They were the legacy of a man who believed the Mafia needed not just power, but structure. After reshaping New York's underworld into the 5 families, Maranzano stood at the top of a structure he had built with strategy, discipline, and blood. But for him, simply organizing the Mafia wasn't enough. He believed that every empire needed a supreme leader, a single figure who held final authority, just like the emperors and generals he admired from ancient Rome. And so, with absolute confidence, he declared himself the boss of all bosses. In his mind, this title wasn't arrogance. It was order. He saw himself as the only one capable of keeping the newly formed families in balance. To Maranzano, the Mafia was an army, and every army needed a commander. But to the younger generation of mobsters, especially those who grew up in America, his declaration looked like something else entirely: a return to the old Sicilian rule they no longer wanted to follow. Maranzano's leadership style became more rigid. He demanded obedience and loyalty from every family, even those he had just reorganized. He began monitoring bosses, evaluating their strengths and weaknesses, and deciding who could be trusted in the new hierarchy. Behind closed doors, he kept lists: men who were loyal, men who were questionable, and men who needed to be watched closely. His obsession with control grew stronger. He believed that absolute order required absolute authority, and he was willing to take harsh measures to protect that authority. His meetings became stricter, his rules became sharper, and his suspicion of others deepened, especially toward the younger, American-born mobsters who didn't share his traditional values. Maranzano had won the war, but now he wanted something greater: unchallenged dominance. He envisioned a mafia where every crime family, every decision, every profit, and every move ultimately flowed upward to him. In his eyes, he was not just a boss, he was the architect of a new era. And to protect that era, he believed any threat, real or imagined, had to be dealt with swiftly. His declaration marked a shift in the underworld. Some respected him, some feared him. But many began to feel trapped under a system that placed one man at the top with too much power and too little trust. The title, boss of all bosses, gave him the authority he craved, but it also created the tension that would shape everything that followed. As Maranzano tightened his grip on the Mafia world, a quiet storm was building beneath the surface. A new generation of mobsters who no longer believed in the old Sicilian way of doing things. These younger men were born or raised in America. They had seen a different world, a world where business mattered more than tradition and profit mattered more than ancient rules. And at the center of this new generation stood one man, Lucky Luciano. To them, Maranzano's strict hierarchy felt outdated. His obsession with Roman generals, his lectures about discipline, his demand for absolute obedience, it all reminded them of the old country they wanted to leave behind. They didn't see him as a visionary. They saw him as someone trying to freeze the Mafia in a past that no longer fit America. Luciano and his allies understood something Maranzano didn't. In America, power couldn't survive through fear alone. It needed flexibility, partnerships, and modern thinking. They believed crime should operate like business, not like a monarchy. And the moment Maranzano declared himself boss of all bosses, the young generation knew they would never truly be free under his rule. As Maranzano grew more paranoid, he began planning to eliminate anyone he saw as a threat, especially these younger, ambitious leaders. He ordered secret investigations, gathered intelligence, and even created lists of men he suspected might one day challenge him. Luciano's name was on that list. But what Maranzano didn't realize was that the new generation had already banded together. Italians, Jews, Irish, men from different backgrounds who saw opportunity in collaboration rather than division. The old world rules that Maranzano lived by no longer applied to this alliance. The more he tightened control, the more they pulled away. The more he demanded obedience, the more they planned their own future. The more he tried to hold his empire together, the more cracks appeared at the foundation. Maranzano had built a system meant to last forever, but the very structure he created inspired a rebellion he never saw coming. As tension escalated between Maranzano and the younger generation of mob leaders, New York's underworld entered a silent but deadly phase. A phase where every meeting, every phone call, and every movement carried suspicion. Maranzano had transformed himself from a respected architect of the Mafia into a ruler whose paranoia shaped his every decision. He believed enemies were closing in from all directions, and in his mind, the only answer was preemptive strikes. He began summoning men to his office under the guise of meetings, evaluating them, testing them, quietly deciding who would live and who would not. He hired bodyguards, tightened security, and filled his days with layers of protection. Yet the more he fortified himself, the more isolated he became. His empire felt less like a throne and more like a fortress built out of fear. The office he used inside the New York building became his command center, a place where he reviewed lists of rivals, discussed strategies for reshaping the families once again, and ordered background checks on anyone who seemed too ambitious or too confident. In those rooms, he spoke about purification, about removing threats before they had a chance to grow. For Maranzano, survival meant eliminating even the possibility of rebellion. But what he didn't see was that the world around him had already shifted. The new generation he distrusted so deeply had stopped fighting for approval. They had begun planning for the future, a future where the Mafia no longer bowed to one supreme ruler. They watched quietly as Maranzano strengthened his defenses, studied his routines, and noted every move he made inside his office. The building he believed protected him was, in reality, becoming a cage. Inside those walls, Maranzano continued building strategies, unaware that the alliances forming against him were stronger than any security he had put in place. He believed he still held total control. He believed his authority was absolute. But the streets were whispering a different story, one where loyalty was fading and fear was no longer enough to hold men together.